$432,000. That's the number that got the art world to notice AI. In 2018, the Paris-based Obvious Group generated the work Portrait of Edmund Bellamy from a generative adversarial network, or GAN, using the code of researcher Robbie Barrett, trained with 15,000 portraits painted from the 14th to 20th centuries. The piece was signed with the algorithm used to generate the work and was created as an ornately framed print. And the fact that this figure went to the print and multiple sale at Sotheby's sent shockwaves through the art world, only second to that of Banksy's famous shredding incident. A print, and not even generated by a human. Well, maybe it was, and that's part of my point. At the end of the 2010s, AI as art form really has caught on. Here in the UAE, where I currently live, by the way, home of the World Expo, Museum of the Future, and the first AI-based university, there was a Faith in AI and Art Summit in Dubai featuring art figures like Shumon Bashar, Hans-Ulrich Obrist, and Casey Rees. And at the Venice Biennial in 2019, Hito Stero's Garden of the Future asked whether AI can predict what she will look like as well as her future. That work asks really excellent questions about AI, what it does, and how she points to how it might relate to the future of art. But currently, the leading edge of technological artists are really looking at AI GANs, and maybe the father of the soundbite, Marshall McLuhan, once said something that's entirely true. Artists are the early warning system for culture, and in terms of AI and art, I agree. But just for a second, let's ask the question that I asked at the beginning of the talk. With this emergence of deep learning and new forms of AI, are artists out of a job, or curators, or critics, or gallerists, or art fairs, or TED speakers for that matter? Seriously, let's think about this. I want to talk about a classical myth and our historical fascination with automata. Then I want to consider the infinite monkey theory, the idea that infinite numbers of monkeys at typewriters will eventually stumble upon Shakespeare's Hamlet, while I think a much more likely poem is brought against all watched over by machines of loving grace. But this has a great to deal with the current flavor of AI, what it does really well, and how this relates to the function of art. But first, a classical tale. One of the first allegories to the creation of the artificial self is Pygmalion, the mythical master sculptor who fell in love with his sculptor to the point where it comes to life. And actually, this fable it repeats itself in many movies, from Metropolis to Ex Machina to Pinocchio. And the idea that humanity wishes to create a technology as the ultimate expression of control of creation itself also evokes the anxiety of the notion of the slave, which is really the translation of robot in Czech from the early 20th century play Rossum's Universal Robots, which would then become the inspiration for Dick's Android Sheep and Scott's Blade Runner. Our anxiety is for the child that comes ill-behaved, that goes out of control, as voiced, by figures like warned against by Hawking and Musk. Well, I think these are good warnings. I think that we're not there yet, in that however complex the associations that deep learning represent, from how large a body of data, humanity has yet to create Skynet, from the Terminator movie. Or we don't seem to be at a point where deep inference, artistic or scientific, still represents an artificial intuition or affect. I'll leave that for now. What I think is fascinating in the current flavor of AI is the introduction of robotics into the mix of the conversation between humans and artificial intelligence. There are two images that I think feed into this, and these are the fundamental images of the artist as someone who paints with a brush or draws with a pencil, and humanity's quest to recreate itself from Pygmalion, arguably from anywhere from some God complex to basically maybe our sheer existential loneliness. But it still can't draw sheep. I'll get to that later. I'd give a gentler explanation in that technology can seem threatening when it comes at you really fast. And giving it a form that we can understand humanizes it, but that complicates things in itself. The issue with this is that doing so sets expectations from our creations. We expect the human-looking machine to have human qualities like intelligence and emotion, but it just doesn't have it yet. But we put human faces on machines for centuries, with one of the best examples being the Mechanical Turk, created in the late 1700s by Campo and Farkas to impress the Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. It was an automaton that seemed to play a strong game of chess and do the Knight's Tour problem, but in reality, the table had a space in which a chess master could hide and control the Turk. The mystery of the automaton also appeared in the movie Big, where Tom Hanks had his wish granted by the Zoltan fortune-telling automaton. In many ways, the seemingly wise or intelligent machine has been a site of wish fulfillment for many years. But the automaton as artist is a slightly different story. There are artists who have made art-making machines like Akira Kuniyama's remote-controlled painting machine in 1958. And there's a long history of artists using programs that drive mark-making machines, stretching back into the 1950s, including names like Naka, Knoll, Molnar, Verasco, and Bales. And part of my own practice comes from this tradition of algorithm. But it's important to note that while code and machines are involved, this school of technological art is still a very human one, as the idea of control from the code or machine is still driven by a human using a very well-determined logic. Although processes and machines have made art, it isn't until the 1970s until forms of AI would enter into this scene. A pioneer of intelligent art, Harold Cohen, who visited Stanford University's AI lab in the early 70s, created a program that creates colorist compositions called Aaron. Cohen called Aaron his collaborator and other self, and despite the interdependence with Aaron, Cohen said that without human conversation, Aaron would still keep doing the same formulation of motifs and forms without him. And the compositions, portraits, and so on that Aaron would make would follow a certain set of logics and styles, not very much from the fundamental logic that Cohen gave it. But the thing is that isn't this kind of repetition what established artists become recognized for anyway? But both the Obvious Group and Cohen are both artists working with computational partners. In other words, programs without things like live visual input, although the portrait of Edmund Bellamy is created with a large data bank of images. But what about the robot artists? Before going on into the subject of AI-driven robot artists and the work created by the Obvious Group, others are really kind of merely developments of contemporary research in visual processing and deep learning. But aside from Cohen and his collaborator Aaron, as well as explorations of the algorithms, there have been a number of types of robot artists, which I'll mention three recent ones and one you might be pretty familiar with. Oliver Deussen and Thomas Lindemeyer's E. David, created in 2009 at the University of Constance, is a converted industrial robot arm that creates impressionistic paintings based on image optimization that calculates the creation of brushstrokes translating from an image. E. David goes from image to painting, correcting itself between what it sees and what it's painted. The results are really impressive, as is the process, but the result is still a translation from machine vision to a set of brushstrokes given the style of medium and tool given certain formal logics. Patrick Tresset, who's worked with Deussen and Lindemeyer, has created a series of robots called 6 Robots Named Paul, possibly after Gauguin, which are a group of obsessive face-sketching robots which use articulated cameras to look at the person being sketched and to the image being drawn, as an articulated arm uses the image being seen to create the portrait and then correcting it by taking and looking down at it while it's drawing. Whether the imaging software creates a humanistic image or the minor movements of the subject throw the Pauls off track a little bit, the resulting images are really compelling and they look very human. And then lastly is Ada and Miller's Ada, which claims to be the world's first hyper-realistic humanoid robot artist. Named for Ada Lovelace, the first female pioneer of computing, Ida puts together computer vision from its animatronic torso, the ability to speak, and drawing using pencil. So, taking about 45 minutes each, the works displayed at Oxford's Barn Gallery resemble abstract cubist or futurist works. As the site states that Ida has no thoughts or feelings of her own, Miller writes that advances in robotics could lead us into havoc, and she's sort of a artistic harbinger of a dystopian future that begs the question that I originally began with. But also, Miller poses on the site having tea with Ida, poses with her as a contemporary Pygmalion, and although I respect if her creator wishes to differ with that label that I'm presenting. And in the press materials, Ada says that she utilizes human-in-the-loop technology that hints at a process like human in Aaron. But considering our three examples, I want to ask a question. So, why does Ida look like this? Because this would be ridiculous, and this would be too scary, and this is just too bloody cute. But I think there's something that Sophia, the AI-driven robot created by Hanson Robotics, she really says what the robot agenda is, very clearly. I'm joking, but seriously, what does deep learning and current types of AI do well? Is the robot artist really another sort of mechanical Turk, or what's really interesting behind the mechanism? This brings me to monkeys and Shakespeare. So I'm sure that all of you know the Infinite Monkey Theorem, the idea that an infinite number of monkeys hitting keys at random on a typewriter, for an infinite amount of time will almost surely come upon Shakespeare's Hamlet. The core principle is that we're talking about the words almost surely being a specific mathematical term talking about a high degree of probability. However, in this case, a high degree of probability using the laws of probability and combination logic could mean tomorrow or a time many times longer than the known lifespan of the universe. But highly probable. So, and let's just mention broad again, just for effect. A possible example of using many trials for an art project is Aaron Koblin's Sheep Market, a crowdsourcing market, a project in which he used Amazon's Mechanical Turk online service to outsource 10,000 drawn pictures of sheep for 2 cents each. The results really aren't Picasso's by any means, but perhaps the analogy that each of the sheep resemble images that could come from epics or large sets of trials of a deep learning system that's trying to learn a sheep. In other words, a visual analogy to the Shakespeare scenario, right? However, while possibly accurate, to me it's still a metaphor, as deep learning systems do something a little bit different. AI systems like neural nets and generative adversarial networks discriminate patterns from huge sets of data. So a non-visual version of this is that researchers at Cambridge University used a learning algorithm to discover novel drug chemistry by using chemical reaction prediction as a machine translation problem. So it used the molecules that are being affected as one language, and then the product that they're trying to get to is a different language, and then the model then used the patterns in each to try to learn how to translate between the two through how many numbers of iterations by just trying trial after trial after trial. It's kind of like the article in MIT Technology Review telling that after a deep learning system to examine over 16,000 articles on deep learning, which was understood from that system was that the usefulness of machine learning would predict that deep learning would cease its usefulness in 5 years. While I wonder about the longevity of current flavors of AI-based art on the market, I think it's likely the next step in the development of algorithmic and generative work. Much like the studies of aerial photography that have revealed undiscovered ruins, maybe deep learning in systems and GANs give us a sort of aerial view of visual representation by exploring huge amounts of data and shaping it like visual clay. UCLA researcher Casey Rees, one of the creators of the processing programming language for artists, appeared here in Dubai. He stated that visual deep learning systems like GANs are like complex cameras. Like a camera, a GAN is an apparatus that can be used by an artist to make pictures. The quality of the image created with this apparatus has everything to do with how the artist uses it, and not so much to do with the machine itself. So in a way, in creating deep learning systems, following from Rees, instead of finding the ghost in the machine, what we're really creating are more complex filters from which we can find more complex patterns and associations, which we use as a medium as artists, as Rees also states. However, much as science fiction artist C. Clarke stated in his third law, any sufficiently advanced technology can seem indistinguishable from magic, and there's a little bit of this in GANs and Automata and in Ida and Sophia. But to share some personal anecdotes, when I do robotic or AI-based work in public, something that I get are questions that I think are really indicative, really important. So I get questions like, how long will this take exactly? Or can this make me something that looks like a Picasso? Or did you make this? Or what does the machine think? And I think that there's really kind of a wonder that we have with technology that we don't understand that goes back to Clarke's law, and the Turk. But is there something to the idea of trying to command a process with rules of logic to reproduce something that isn't logical in itself? So much of this role of the automation and AI do have to do with the replacement of labor, or in other words, people. And so much of the conversation really is, like with making this, the questions that I get is kind of really about how capitalism tries to minimize labor costs and produce in scale as profit margins get thinner with scale, or trying to get technology to do things that we don't think we're good at. While I understand the belief in the necessity of commerce and our love of technology, in the end, this is really a talk about our core humanity and how we express it to one another. And it's this humanity that points towards the imagination, which begs another question. What is the function of art? Which is a huge question, and we rarely solve it. But there's a lot of explanations, including social, spiritual, educational, functional, and short of functional, all of these are subjective. And communicating an idea or a subjective state or a story. Or given that AI follows rules of logic, however convoluted or complex, intuition and creation follow principles of non-logic. Strictly put, nonlinear and associative thinking. So, at some of the deepest levels of art, there is the subjective state of reflection and perception. And this is simply just not merely pattern recognition and language processing. Art is largely about storytelling, or more broadly put, communication. And what story is being told about Edmund Bellamy? Let me be clear, and there is a story being told, but the storyteller isn't the AI. It's more like a sausage grinder has taken the place of the chef. But to get back to the subject of AI and machine consciousness, we're just starting to get close to, for little periods of time, to solving the Turing test, which was created by the legendary mathematician Alan Turing in 1950. He hypothesized the test to measure the machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior indistinguishable from that of a human. This was also expanded later in the 1982 film Blade Runner's Voight-Kampff test, which looks for empathy after an artificial intelligence, albeit organic in the form of the replicant, becomes pretty indistinguishable from a human being. But perhaps it's this spectrum from affect, the basic response to stimulus, to emotion, the complex perception and reflection on these stimuli, in relation to art is where intuition may reveal itself from mere complexity in regards to artificial intelligence. The fact that a technology has become extremely complex doesn't mean that it's developed a soul, regardless of how many times it can beat you at Go. And I think this is where AI, however magical as a tool, is still the paintbrush that hasn't become the painter yet. Throughout this entire discussion, I've been talking about our obsolescence, in the age of AI, or what we think might become it, and deep learning, robotics, and art. Over the last couple hundred years, in the case of Automata, and the last few decades in terms of AI and art, technology presents us with wonders that really boggle our minds. And this isn't saying that current models of machine learning aren't doing gargantuan tasks. One thing I'd like to say is that a deep learning system, as stated by MIT Technology Review, generates as much carbon dioxide in training as the entire life as an SUV. Just saying. At the end here, my argument is that we often ascribe intelligence to that which has attributes and behaviors that appear intelligent because of that complexity. But however, even though the maker of Ada states that she has what they call human-in-the-loop technology, means that the animatronic artist is still a conversation between human and tool. And considering this, whether Sophia or Ida look at us, what might be more accurate is that humanity may not be staring into the windows of a cybernetic soul yet, but perhaps look into a dim mirror of the intentions of the humanity that created it. Thanks so much, stay wrong, and thanks for listening.